I am not ashamed to admit that I squealed like a 4-year-old in a toy store, okay? Hi, I'm Claudia and I am a sucker for a good TV franchise. There's something about like multiple TV shows that are all intertwined that I just really love, okay? And no TV franchise is quite as good as the One Chicago franchise. The One Chicago TV franchise consists of 3 shows: Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, and Chicago Med. Technically, there is a 4th one, Chicago Justice, but we don't talk about that one. It wasn't very good. Anyway, in my opinion, One Chicago should be the blueprint for TV franchises. Like, so many TV shows have tried to do spin-off shows that incorporate into the main show, but it never like goes quite according to plan. For example, you've got things like Grey's Anatomy, which had 2 spin-off shows, Private Practice and Station 19, both of which are no longer on TV. Private Practice had 6 seasons and Station 19 had 7 seasons, but Grey's Anatomy is on its 22nd season and is now just on its own. You also have other shows like 911, where its first spin-off, 911 Lone Star, aired its final episode around this time last year, and they're now trying again with a second spin-off called 911 Nashville, where season 1 of that is currently airing, but none of them are quite like the One Chicago franchise. Like with those other 2 shows, the original show that was like the first one has outlived the spin-offs. Obviously, 911 Nashville is still airing, but it's only on its first season, so like we can't take that as like it's gonna be a good thing. Whereas with the One Chicago franchise, all 3 shows are still airing. None of them have outlived the others. I think there's many reasons for that are probably like technical TV stuff, but I'm just going to talk about the things I see like as a viewer. Also, this video will contain spoilers for all 3 One Chicago shows up to and including the most recent season, so like be aware. The first thing that makes it such a good TV franchise is that all 3 shows take place in the same location. Something that 911 has struggled with its spin-offs is they all take place in different cities across the country, which means there's less opportunities for crossover episodes. Whereas if you have all 3 shows taking place in the same city, like in One Chicago, where they're all in Chicago, you have so many opportunities for crossovers. And I'm not even talking big crossovers, I'm talking about the little ones where you see one character from one show in a different show. Grey's Anatomy kind of tried to do this. Its first spin-off, Private Practice, was set in LA, so that was like completely different place, but they still did crossover episodes every once in a while. But the second spin-off, Station 19, did take place in Seattle with Grey's Anatomy, and they really tried to intertwine everything. I just think Station 19 didn't have the same kind of charm as Grey's Anatomy did. I think Station 19 really tried to be that like intertwined spin-off show, but I think it was just dwarfed by like the enormity that is Grey's Anatomy. Like when Station 19 started, I think it's like season 14 of Grey's Anatomy like it coincides with, so there was so much of Grey's Anatomy like already there. That's like 14 years of storylines and characters that Station 19 just like didn't have, and it just didn't really work too well. But the One Chicago franchise is just so good at intertwining all of those shows. And my second reason for that is the characters. I'm not just talking about the characters in the shows they're on, I'm talking about characters moving across shows and having relationships with characters on different shows. Off the top of my head, on Grey's Anatomy, we only have this 3 times. Once it's obviously Bailey and Ben Warren, that is obviously pre-established on Grey's Anatomy before Station 19 even exists. And then you have Maya and Karina, but Karina basically moves over to Station 19 like full time by the end. And then I might be misremembering this, but I think at some point Vic Hughes dates Jackson Avery for like a few episodes. Whereas on One Chicago, you have a lot more interconnected relationships across shows. The first one is sibling relationships. So from the very start of Fire, I think it's like episode 3 of season 1, we are introduced to Antonio Dawson as Gabby Dawson's brother. And then the next season of Fire, when PD picks up, Antonio's there as the main character. And then we also have Jay Halstead on PD and Will Halstead on Med. And that's established, I think it's like mid-season 2 of PD where Will shows up. And I think that's really important to have like family relationships across the different shows, because it's not just like characters dating, like these people are related, they are close, like that's important to establish. Like with, for example, Station 19 and Grey's Anatomy, we were expected to believe that these characters were like really good friends, even though we'd seen them interact like maybe twice. And then with One Chicago, that's more believable if the characters are siblings and like you're friends with one of the siblings so you know the other sibling, that kind of makes sense. And then moving on from sibling relationships, we also have romantic relationships. So many people date across the 2 shows, like I'm probably gonna forget some random relationship that happened, I'm just gonna put that out there right now. I remember Erin Lindsay dating Kelly Severide for a bit, and I think it's like season 3 of PD, or maybe it's season 3 of Fire, I can't remember. Right at the beginning of season 2 of Fire, when Jay Halstead is introduced, him and Gabby Dawson start dating. In like, I want to say seasons 5 and 6 of Fire, Sylvie Barrett and Antonio Dawson have a thing. You have Trudy Platt and Mouch, they get married. And then right at the end of season 2 of Med, Natalie and Jay Halstead, it's like insinuated that they go on a date, but it never really comes of anything and it doesn't really make sense, so I'm just gonna ignore that one. And off the top of my head, that's all of like the inter-show romantic relationships I can think of. There's probably one I'm forgetting, but I think that's really important because it means you get to see both of those characters on shows that they are not originally from, and it kind of just helps to establish this universe where all of these characters know each other, and even though they're on different TV shows, they are all mostly friends. The last thing I want to mention with characters is characters that completely switch shows, and there's only really one of these I can think of, and that's Jeff Clark. He shows up in like, I want to say season 2 or 3 of Fire. It's early on, and he's there for like a significant number of episodes. He has like a significant like character arc there, and then he like disappears, and I think he disappears like between seasons, and it said like, oh, he had a back injury or something, but then he shows up again in like, I think it's season 2 of Med, and he's like a med student, and turns out he's like left firefighting and is becoming a doctor instead, which doesn't really make sense timeline wise, but we're not going to go into that. He is, to my memory, the only character who has completely switched shows. Like obviously characters appear in 2 different shows, but he's the only one that's completely switched. I think it's worth mentioning because even though Jeff Clark didn't stick around in Med for too long, he's only there for I think 1 season, it was still nice to see that they were like bringing back a character from the universe that we already know, and they're like relating it to new characters that we haven't really seen too much of yet in Med. And now my last reason for why I think One Chicago is such a good TV franchise is the pre-establishment of characters before their show starts. Now obviously this doesn't apply to Fire because Fire is the first show in the franchise, but for PD we see like Antonio Dawson and Sergeant Voight from very early on in season 1 in Chicago Fire. I've said before in the video I did all about spin-off shows that I don't know whether like PD was already being talked about this early on in Fire, or if like there was just the potential of maybe a PD spin-off happening and they thought, oh, we'll introduce some police characters just in case. But the way it works, it all just slots in really nicely. Like Hank Voight, I would call the antagonist for the entirety of season 1 of Chicago Fire, which is why it's kind of questionable that they made him like the good guy in Chicago PD, but I can't go into that right now. I could talk about that for hours. But we know him very well, and at the end of the season we get like the big payoff with him going to prison, and then he comes back in season 2 and he's out of prison and he like ends up leading PD. But all of that means we have a good idea of what Hank Voight's backstory is before we even get to the backdoor pilot for PD. And we also have like a pretty good idea of Antonio's like personality and character. We don't see like as much of his like storyline as we do Voight. We literally see Voight go to prison, but we know he's like a good guy, he wants to be a good cop, and he's a good brother to Gabby. That's like all we basically know about him, but that's kind of all we need to know. The rest of the characters of PD don't get really established till the backdoor pilot, or in the case of Jay, like early on in season 2 of Fire. The backdoor pilot for PD is very interesting to me because it doesn't have a lot of the main characters that we have in PD. Yes, we have Hank Voight and Antonio Dawson, but we also have Julie Wilhite, who dies in episode 1 of PD. And I don't know if that was like already known, like all of the actors and the writers and everything knew she was going to die in the first episode of PD, but it feels odd to like establish her just to kill her off. But anyway, in that episode I think we also see Kevin Atwater very briefly just as a patrol officer, and I don't think it's really like super obvious that he's going to be a main character in PD, but like we know he's there, we see him, but the rest of the characters just aren't present. Platt's not there, Erin's not there, Alinsky's not there, like lots of the main characters that we come to love in PD just aren't there yet. But I do think there's enough of the characters in the backdoor pilot to get people interested in watching PD, which is like, you know, the aim of the backdoor pilot. The only character from PD who's there but not in the backdoor pilot is Jay Halstead. They gave him a special entrance, I don't know why, but I'm here for it. If you don't remember, basically Jay goes undercover with a gang who's trying to extort Molly's. He's like introduced in the bar and he's kind of flirting with Gabby and she's kind of into it, and then I think we like see him start dating kind of, and then we see Jay like in a shot steal the keys for Molly's, I want to say. Like he steals something, he does something bad, I remember. And then we see him with this gang who's like trying to get money out of Molly's, and Gabby is obviously like, what the hell? So she talks to her brother about it, and Antonio finds out that Jay's an undercover cop and tells Gabby, which breaks so many rules. But you know what, for the plot, I'll allow it. So then Gabby shows up to Jay's place and is like, you're a cop, and then they end up like dating for a bit. That is technically how Jay got his spot in intelligence, which makes me giggle every single time. Because what do you mean they established this whole relationship just to like never speak on it in PD? To my memory, the only time their relationship is ever mentioned in PD is when Jay and Antonio are talking when Antonio leaves to go work for the DA's office, and Jay's like thanking him for getting him the job, and Antonio's like, I only got it for you because you were dating my sister. And like, if you just watch PD, that would be so confusing because they never mention it. But all this to say, they do establish the PD characters very well in Chicago Fire before PD starts, those of them that do actually show up. However, with Med it's a bit different because excluding the backdoor pilot, we get introduced to 2 characters. The first one is April Sexton, and we meet her because Kelly finds out that she's working at Med, and turns out her and Kelly were like friends in high school or something. I think they date for like a minute, but I can't remember, honestly. But we see her quite a bit in season 3 of Fire before Med starts. The other character we get introduced to is Will Halstead, and we meet him on PD. Obviously, he's there as Jay's brother, and his introduction is so funny to me. Basically, like, Platt calls Jay over and is like, your brother got in a fight, you need to go get him. And then Jay gets him and is like, what are you doing here? But like, he meets Erin. There's like a case where Voight calls him to like do surgery on this guy who's got shot on like a kitchen table, and they have to like keep turning the lights off because the gang's looking for them. It's like tense. Okay, and then there's that Law and Order crossover episode, like the start of the Gregory William Yates kind of thing, and like Will's a suspect for a minute, and I can't remember if he was actually like a suspect on Law and Order, and like they just had the same actor, so they were like, oh, surprise, he's a suspect in this, or what. I don't actually remember because I've never seen Law and Order, so I base all of this on like little clips I've seen. But that's kind of all we see from him in PD. The main time we actually see him like in action is in the Backdoor Pilot. Now, the Med Backdoor Pilot is in Fire, just like the PD Backdoor Pilot is also in Fire, and I think that makes sense just because Fire's the like longer running show. It like makes sense to put all the Backdoor Pilots in that one. Apart from the Chicago Justice Backdoor Pilot, that was in PD. It's that episode in like season 3 of Fire where a guy like blows up the ED, and that's where we have like a brand new ED in Med. Like we all remember that, right? We're all on track. And I love that episode because it's the first like kind of 3-way crossover episode we have. Obviously all the Fire gang are there because I think they were like transporting patients there when like the guy blew up the ED, and like there's questions about whether there's like a biological toxin or whatever, so some of them are locked outside, some of them are locked inside. Jay shows up and he's like panicking because obviously Will's in there, and I'm like, yes, give me more. The one thing that happened in that episode is like Will at one point introduced himself to, I think it's like Gabby and Herman, and I wish Gabby said something about being Jay's ex-girlfriend because that would have been really funny. Okay, I know it's meant to be like a tense series episode, but I would have enjoyed it. Okay, but in the Backdoor Pilot we also meet, I think, 2 more Med characters. I know we meet Dr. Charles. He's there in like the parking lot and he's like helping them calm down the crowd. And I think like off the top of my head we very briefly meet Sharon Goodwin, which obviously makes sense. But actually like in the ED we meet like a doctor that we never see again. Like there's this other doctor who I think off the top of my head saves Kelly Seroy's life, and then she is never mentioned again. I have to say, for me, the PD Backdoor Pilot, I like that more than the Med Backdoor Pilot, but that might just be a me thing. My favourite one of the 3 shows is Chicago PD, so that does kind of make sense. But what both of those Backdoor Pilots do is establish these new shows in universe. They do a very, very good job at making sure characters across shows know each other and we see them interacting. And all the shows continue to do that over the course of like the entire show. You'll get episodes of PD where they go to like the scene of a crime and like a couple of the people we know from Fire are there. It's usually Joe Cruz in like the earlier seasons. He's just everywhere. I don't know why. On Med, sometimes they'll have like a trauma situation and they'll take the trauma surgeons to the scene and there'll be like some of the firefighters there. Sometimes you see one of the paramedics from Fire taking a patient to Med and we just see it in Med. Or on the flip side, we sometimes in Fire, we see them taking a patient to Med and we see like a couple of the doctors. I assume it's very easy for them to do this because they're all filming at the same time in like about the same place. But that is something I think other spin-off shows have struggled with. Number one, if like your TV shows don't take place in the same location, it's very hard to have your characters interact. The only time I can think of it happening is very recently, right at the beginning of season 9 of 911. Basically during the space storyline, they're like trying to get in contact with the spaceship and they have to like use the Nashville servers instead of their own. If you're not a 911 fan, nothing I've said just makes sense. But yeah, they went into space, they had to use the Nashville stuff, and just don't ask, okay? But on Grey's Anatomy, where they are in the same city, we didn't get all of that stuff. Like very occasionally when they were taking your patient to Grey Sloan, we would see like Bailey or someone take the patient off them, but most of the time it'd be like an unnamed doctor. And we almost never saw the firefighters on Grey's Anatomy. The only time I can think of off the top of my head is when Meredith's house catches fire, then we see the firefighters, obviously. But like on the One Chicago shows, it's a normal thing to see a character from a different show in like a couple of scenes. It's not like out of the ordinary, it's just something that happens pretty much every single episode. But like when the guys at PD go to talk to a victim at Med and we see a nurse we know, or like the Fire guys have like a situation going on where they need police help, which happens so much on Fire for some reason, but they always get help from someone in intelligence. Side note, there's one time in, I think it's like season 4 of Fire, or I'm not completely sure when it is, but like they need the police for something. It's like Gabby and Matt need to talk to the police, and Matt's like, oh, we should call Jay Halstead, he seems like a good guy, and Gabby's like, no. She's like, no, it's probably not a good idea to call my ex-boyfriend for this. Like, let's not do that. Let's call Adam Ruzek instead. But now I've talked about all the reasons why I think One Chicago is like the blueprint for TV franchises. I'm going to talk about the reasons why they kind of made a couple of mistakes. Number one mistake, Chicago Justice. Okay, like, I'm not going to dance around it. If you don't know, Chicago Justice was the 4th One Chicago show. It only ever got 1 season. And do you remember that season in PD when Antonio leaves to go work for, like, the DA's office and then he comes back a season later? That's when he was on Chicago Justice. I have never watched it. It's not available on streaming anywhere. In the UK, you have to like buy it or rent it. And I'm like, it's one season. No one talks about it well. I'm just not gonna watch it. And I think they learned from that 4 shows was one too many. 3 shows is like the sweet spot because they have never tried to bring in a 4th show again. Like that happened, I want to say at this point, like almost 10 years ago. So like they've learned from their mistake there. Their second one is retconning characters' backstories. This does not happen very often at all. In fact, it's only ever happened in one case, and that is the case of one Will Halstead. If you go back to season 2 of Chicago PD and watch Will Halstead's introduction, you will realise that they changed a lot about his backstory between his introduction and the start of Med. Number 1, when he's introduced, it said that he's Jay's younger brother, and every time I watch it, I'm shocked, because in my head, like, Will's the older brother, but, like, originally he was supposed to be the younger brother, but I think they realised that doesn't make sense timeline-wise, because it was like, if Jay's older, but Will's already, like, a qualified doctor, like, Jay's gonna be way older than they've been telling us he is, so I think that's why they changed it around. Number 2, Will was a plastic surgeon. He was a plastic surgeon in New York. That's said multiple times in PD, yet the times we see him before Med starts, he does abdominal surgery for some reason. Like, all I know from Grey's Anatomy tells me that plastic surgeons do not do abdominal surgery. That would be a general surgeon. Like, come on. And then they have him completely changed to be chief resident in the ED in emergency medicine. That is not a plastic surgeon job. They just, like, completely changed his backstory. And we see him as chief resident in the ED in Fire in the Backdoor pilot. So why was he doing the abdominal surgery if he's chief resident of the ED? It doesn't make sense. The only reason I can think of is originally Med was planned to be more like Grey's Anatomy, in that you have a bunch of doctors from different departments and they work together on cases. But somewhere along the line, the plans changed and it was going to be focused on just the ED. They needed Will Halstead in there, so they just kind of changed his job and hoped no one would notice. So yeah, we start off with Will Halstead, Jay's younger brother and plastic surgeon, and by the time Med starts, we have Will Halstead, Jay's older brother and emergency medicine doctor. Next mistake is continuity. And maybe this is just super obvious to me because I've been watching the older seasons where it happens a couple of times, but they have actors come in, play minor roles, and then they get main roles in a different show. For example, the actor who plays Dr. Choi plays a criminal on PD like a season before Med starts, and the actor who plays Chili, the paramedic on Fire, she was on PD as Antonio's CI like a season before she was introduced in Fire. And with like Dr. Choi, they never speak on it. With Chili, they do. They say she had a sister who she called Jellybean and she died in Kentucky, and that is a direct reference to the CI from PD who was called Jellybean. But it's just kind of weird because it's like, we all know it's the same actor. Like, it's not just sisters who look really alike, it's the same actor. Also with continuity, the timeline has always been an issue for the One Chicago franchise. Sometimes you'll be watching like, it's episode 7 for this season of all 3 shows, and one takes place in summer and one takes place in winter, and we're meant to be knowing that they take place at the same time. Like, sometimes one show will have a time skip where the other doesn't, but they somehow intersect at the same point. Like, how does that work? Or something happens in one show that for some reason does not affect the other show at all. Like, for example, as I said before, at the end of season 2 of Meg, Natalie and Jay go on a date. If you watch PD at the same point, the end of season 4, Jay's not having a good time. He's just broken up with Erin, but he's still completely hung up on her. There is no mention of Natalie. Also, in season 3 of Med, remember when Will Halstead gets like that tick on him and he gets like paralyzed? Why wasn't Jay called? Like, they didn't know what was happening until right at the end of the episode. They thought Will might die, and Jay just isn't there. There are a few times where they address things that happen on different shows. Like, for example, at the start of season 6 of Fire, they're at Molly's, and Gabby is talking to Sylvie's friend Hope. Hope's like, oh, I've never been to a firefighter bar before, and Gabby's like, oh, it's firefighters, police officers, doctors, lawyers. Well, not so many lawyers anymore, obviously referencing the fact that Chicago Justice got cancelled. And also in like season 5 and 6 of Fire, we see a lot of like the Dawson family storyline, and they do a very good job of actually making sure Antonio's there, and I assume that's because when season 5 of Fire is going on, that's season 1 of Justice, and they were just like, oh, this show isn't doing too well, we'll just shove him back onto Fire. But there are so many times in PD where Jay gets injured because that guy is just an injury magnet. He gets injured so many times, and Will Halstead, he's never there. He's there for the big ones. He's there when Jay gets shot in season 7, but like not the other injuries. Episode 1 of season 3 of PD, right? Jay gets injured. It's that case where he gets kidnapped and like they have to bring Erin in even though she's like been on sabbatical or whatever. Jay is like horrifically injured and Will just doesn't show up. Like, we see Jay sat on the back of an ambulance and there is no Will in sight. They don't even go to Med. Like, I wanted to see that, please. And obviously there's that plot line. I think it's either the end of season 5 or 6 of PD. I forget which season. Whenever Jay and Will's dad dies, that's like a whole Fire PD Med involvement. and that's like a very fun time. Like, as a viewer, I'm not saying it's a good time for the characters because it's very tense and serious, but it's fun, that crossover, to see all your favourite characters interacting with each other for like 3 whole episodes. They did a 2-way crossover before Med even existed. That was that bombing at the hospital. It starts in Fire and then it goes into PD, but we see the PD guys like starting the investigation in Fire, and then we see the Fire guys doing more fiery stuff in PD. The only other like mistakes I can think of is when they cross over with shows that aren't in the One Chicago universe. So in like the early seasons of PD, there's a few Law and Order SVU crossovers. As I previously said, I've never watched Law and Order all the way through. There is like nowhere in the UK where the entire show is available. I've only ever seen clips and bits from episodes of Chicago PD. And I get they're made by the same creator, and like I kind of know who these people are just from like being on the internet. But it is kind of confusing when 2 different franchises are crossing over with each other. And then very briefly, Haley shows up in FBI for an episode. Remember when Voight sends her to New York for a month? She shows up in an episode of FBI in that time. I think it's season 1 or 2 of FBI as well, so I think they were trying to get people to, you know, watch FBI, which I still haven't. I think I watched like the first episode once and I just like couldn't get into it, but I will eventually. And speaking of guest stars, recently we have had multiple characters who have since left the show coming back as guest stars. At the start of the most recent season of Med, which is, I want to say, season 11, but we had Will and Natalie come back as guest stars along with Owen, who is all grown up, and that made me feel so old. But like they're in 2, maybe 3 episodes, I think. But it was so good to see them again. I've missed them, okay? And then yesterday, as I am filming this, they announced that Jay and Haley are coming back to PD. Oh my god! I am not ashamed to admit that I squealed like a 4-year-old in a toy store, okay? Jay and Haley are like my favourite ship from all 3 shows. I'm kind of insane about them. So the fact that they're coming back and we might finally get closure for them, I will scream. They're coming back for the big 3-way crossover event that they're doing. I think it's on the 4th of March. Obviously, that means the 4th of March in America, which means for me in the UK, I'll watch it like the next day or whatever. But there is 2 ways they could go about this. Either number 1, we just get closure for them because the end of their relationship was something we only ever saw from Haley's point of view. Jay was long gone by then, so either we get closure for both of them, or they have them kind of have like a hopeful ending and they like kind of like say, oh, maybe we're getting back together. My heart, either way, we're getting some great fanfics out of this and I'm happy with that. We know they're not already back together because they've posted like a little clip as like a teaser, and Jay was like, nice to see you again. So obviously they're not already back together like I kind of hoped they would be like 2 days ago. If you asked me 2 days ago, my opinion would have been they re-met up together wherever Haley went off to and they're back together and they're happy. But obviously we know now that's not happening, but potentially they could still do that. So I'm happy either way. The worst thing they could do is just leave us with no closure, no hopeful ending, no nothing for the 2 of them. They just deserve to be happy together, okay? And whether that's like a hopeful ending for the show or just closure for them, I'll take either because either will give me really good fanfics and I'll probably get fanfics for both anyway. Speaking of Jay and Haley though, that's actually the reason I'm currently rewatching all 3 shows. I'm in the process of writing my very first Upstead fanfic. It's called Intertwined. As I'm filming this, there's 9 chapters up and it's about 30,000 words. By the time this video goes up, it will be probably more than that. I'm still writing it. I'm actually 2 chapters ahead. I like to be 2 chapters ahead of like the last one I posted. So I've posted chapter 9, but chapter 11 has already been finished. And I don't post the next chapter until I've finished the chapter I'm writing, if that makes sense. So I always have like a buffer zone. But the basic plot of this fanfic is that like Jay and Haley dated like years and years and years ago in like their early 20s, and like the first time we meet Haley in season 4 episode 21 is like their first time seeing each other in like 8.5 years. I've been planning this fanfic for like a year and a half, so to actually be writing it has been so much fun, genuinely. I love these 2 characters so much, and to be able to like put everything I've been thinking about actually onto like the page as such has been so fun. And if you like the idea of that fanfic, I'll leave a link to it in the description. There'll also be a link to just my AO3 profile if you want to check out all my fanfics. They're mostly 911 though. I'm genuinely having like the time of my life writing this. I'm currently writing like very angsty chapters, so just like prepare for that, okay? The most recent chapter I posted is the second half of season 5 episode 7, which is that episode where Jay goes undercover. I think we all remember what I'm talking about. So it's angsty, and then the next chapter is like a little bit better, and then it gets really angsty again. So like, I'm sorry in advance. But anyway, I'm not gonna go on about my fanfic for like any longer. But rewatching it, and I'm like at the start when like Jay and Haley are just meeting each other, and now I know this like new episode is coming where they're meeting again and they're like divorced and now they're getting like meeting each other again. I'm going insane. Can you tell? I'm actually not even up to date on One Chicago. In the UK, we currently have the first half of the most recent season. We have up to episode 7, but then obviously we went on mid-season break and we're not coming back till April, and I can't wait that long. So I'm going to find other ways to watch the episodes I am currently missing. I don't actually know how many episodes are out already and how many I'm behind. I think it would be like 10, 11. I'm basing this off like where 911 is right now. Also, I don't know if they're breaking for the Winter Olympics. If they are, that gives me time to catch up. But I just love the One Chicago franchise. I love all 3 shows, specifically Chicago PD. It's always been my favorite, but I do love all 3 shows. And I think it does such a perfect job of being like the blueprint for TV franchises. So if any TV writers are watching this, and I know that's like a very, 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 very low chance, but if any of you are and you're like planning on writing a spin-off for like an existing show, go and look at the One Chicago franchise and do it like them. Don't do it like 911. Like Nashville, the only thing it's got going for it right now is that Buck and Eddie are coming in episode 12. That's it. That's all it's got. Now I have to do the awkward and kind of cringy thing and ask you if you enjoy the video to maybe leave a like on it and potentially even subscribe. I make a bunch of videos all about my favourite TV shows and fan fiction and all that kind of stuff. So if you like that kind of thing, you'll probably like the stuff I do on here. If you want to follow me on Twitter or TikTok, there'll be links down below in the description. And I post new fanfic related TikToks literally every single day. So if that sounds like something you would like, you might want to follow me over there. And just before I go, I want to say thank you for all the support on my last video, my heated rivalry video. As I'm filming this, that video has been up for a week and it has like over 200 views, which might seem tiny, but to me that's like a massive deal because none of my videos have ever done that well. So like, thank you so much for just enjoying that video. So yeah, I've been Claudia. I hope you enjoyed the video and I'll hopefully see you all soon. Bye.